So welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 65, and I'm really excited to welcome on Gideon Hod, who's currently product and ops at Gopuff. So if you're not familiar with Gopuff, it's a delivery service marketplace for everyday needs and essentials. It's raised over $2.4 billion in venture capital and recently announced a $1 billion funding round at a valuation north of $15 billion a few weeks ago. So prior to Gopuff, Gideon was also at Stripe, and before that on the ops team at Uber. So Gideon, welcome to the group chat, and it's definitely great to have you join us here today. So certainly not every day that we get to have someone with the experience in marketplaces, that sense of scale that Uber and Gopuff are at join us. So I'm really excited to dive into your experience today on the group chat. Before we jump into things, though, I think it'd be really great if you can start off by sharing a little bit more on your background for those that don't know you.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. This is super exciting. I started with marketplaces. It was back in 2015. And my degree is in urban planning, but I definitely wasn't using my degree at the time. And I kind of fell into Uber by chance because I was working at a big bank and Uber was just growing and scaling and trying to look for people to work for them locally. I was in Arizona and I got in as an operations manager for Arizona, New Mexico, and other places in the region. And it wasn't really meant to be anything with like urban planning or marketplaces when I started, but as the business grew and as I started to gravitate towards making sure that our cities were operating efficiently and starting to own those metrics and working on mapping tools internally, that's where everything started to kind of click for me. So it was really exciting to be able to build my career off of that. And then I moved to San Francisco. Or actually, this is 2014. And in 2015, I moved to San Francisco to work on what we called the product operations team. And I focused every part of like marketplace product is where I started off. So all of our dynamic pricing, all of our intelligent dispatching, positioning of drivers, marketplace health metrics, all that stuff is what I worked on from a product ops perspective at HQ. And I'm happy to talk about what product ops means too. In a few minutes, but from there I went on to driver experience. And then after about 5 years, I wanted to explore more marketplaces. And so I tried working at a bike sharing startup for a few months, but it unfortunately ran out of money right after I joined. So that is what led me to Stripe, where I got to actually work with the same manager I had at Uber. We basically got the chance to build the product operations team a second time around and take our learnings from the first time. And it was really cool to do over again. His name is Blake Samick. And definitely a very different environment because it's certainly not a marketplace from our perspective, but we're empowering other marketplaces at Stripe, especially with our Connect products. So it was a cool change on like the career path a little bit there. And then after a few years there, I decided I actually was kind of craving that original marketplace experience I had. So I went headfirst into Gopuff after some of my former Uber colleagues convinced me to look into it. And then that's where I am today. I now lead the product operations team for both Gopuff and also RideOS, one of our acquisitions, who was building all of our like dispatching and routing technology.
Awesome. That's quite the background. Some pretty incredible experience. So there's a lot we're going to jump into here with Uber and then at Gopuff. But before we do, I guess it might be helpful to talk about product ops as you brought up before.
Yeah, so I really love product operations as opposed to a product manager type role. I've tried both. Product operations, we are at the intersection of all of the user-facing teams, the users themselves, all of the product teams, the executive level. We're there to complete the feedback loops from all those users and the people who are talking to users and get that feedback into the product team so they know what to prioritize, what the biggest pain points are, if they're moving in the right direction, and help shape the strategy. We also own all of the internal knowledge, not own the internal knowledge, but we own making the internal knowledge available to all the different levels of teams. So building internal wikis so that people know everything about our products without having to constantly reach out to the product teams, having all of the tools in place so our support teams can support the products with our users. Basically anything that requires transparency and visibility into the product, we make that happen. Also, a big part of it is just the operationalization of product development. So how we plan the launches, how we pick when and where to beta test things, how we determine that a beta was successful. So we bring it to GA, all that stuff around partnering with the PM to bring their product to life in the safest and most scalable way possible. That's what they lean on us for. And I really like that. I mentioned I like it more than a PM role. I think a PM role is more of like a top-down role. Like they determine the strategy, they're writing the roadmaps, they're driving the direction of the product team. But I see product operations as more of a bottoms-up role where we're partnering with, like we get to be on the front lines, especially in like Uber and Gopuff, like with the partnering with drivers, speaking with them, getting into our micro fulfillment centers or into our driver support centers and seeing what those frontline employees are saying and help, I guess, like course correct sometimes like what product is working on or help bring the products to life from the engineer's perspective. When you have engineers just sitting in San Francisco or Philadelphia, but you have a global footprint, how do you bring that to life for those people who don't get to be on the front lines? I think it's a really cool role.
Yeah, certainly. That's definitely a very, very critical role for marketplaces too.
Yes.
So if we go back to the early days, at Uber and your time there, could you share a little bit more about what you were working on from the product ops there?
Yeah. So when I first joined the product ops side of Uber, this was when product teams at Uber were really starting to get formalized. We identified the need for product ops at Uber because, like I was just saying, we have a few people in San Francisco who are building for a global company and they don't know what the regulatory impact of some of the decisions they're making could be, or what they need to build for regulatory wise, or what the different rider and driver behavior of people in Southeast Asia versus Europe versus North America is like. And so in addition to that, they also were building a lot and people didn't know what they were building and when and why. And so there was just confusion both ways. There was misalignment both ways. And so that's when the need for product ops was determined. And it was super successful. I think when I left Uber, it must have been dozens of people, like 60, 70 people, but we were, I think, a first group of like 7 or 8 brought on in early to mid 2015. And we at Uber, the area of product that I worked on was called Marketplace. And so bringing like surge pricing at the time was very nascent, was very simple compared to what it is now. And so building more complex surge and more intelligent dispatch where we can incorporate actual objective functions and have it more dynamic to the types of marketplaces that we're developing, basically helping with the way Uber was scaling and the way that the marketplaces were becoming like thicker with supply and demand at so many different places and times. We just needed more complex product. And the reason why product ops was so essential for that stage was that you had city teams, like our driver operations people or customer experience people, what do we call them? Marketing managers. They owned specific metrics and they had a specific understanding of how things worked. And so we needed to really bring operations along for the ride on how the metrics they were tracking would be changing, what levers they could pull to fix their marketplace would come into existence, what would change with the driver experience. All that stuff needed to have someone change manage and drive all of that while the PMs focused on shipping a new algorithm. And so my first projects were around those new surge algorithms, or something that in the early days we called forward dispatch or back-to-back trips. Now it's so ubiquitous where a driver has his next trip before his current one ends. Like that was a brand new thing that unlocked just so much time on the network across the globe that now just seems so simple. Those were some of my early projects. And then after all those foundational layers were put down, the marketplace product ops team grew, and I got to focus specifically on the metrics and the tooling behind those metrics for city operations teams.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us. That's pretty cool. Those are definitely 2 projects that I think now seem quite simple from the user side, but I'm sure a lot went into it. I can only imagine. So this is a kind of a broad question, but looking back from your time at Uber, maybe what are some of the key learnings from your time there that you then took with you to Stripe and Gopuff?
I think a lot of my learnings come from building the product operations team. Specifically, one of them is when we were building the team for the first time, I think we hit some roadblocks in really selling the value of our team and how we were going to partner with the greater org. And I think why that happened is because we took the bottoms up approach of partnering with city operations teams. And I don't know if leadership was just not clued in on what we were doing or the value of our team, but it was a miss. And so it was harder to at first grow our team and to get the buy-in of leadership of what we were doing with their teams. And so at Stripe, before I even stepped in, the leader of that team really started from the top and sold the vision of product operations and how we were going to partner with leadership as well as all of the operators in the company. And it made starting a team super easily. And now that I'm head of product operations for the current org, that's also what I'm doing. I'm partnering with all the leaders to help them see the vision of what I'm going to try to do and what the team I'm wanting to build so we can help build products faster, safer, at a bigger scale and do so as we bring RideOS into the Gopuff family. Separately from product operations, some really important learnings that I had were around not only communication with drivers, but I think communication internally, like executive type communication, bringing people along for the ride at all levels while you're building product and shipping it to all of the stakeholders in the company, I think is really important. So they see what's coming from at least as far away as possible, and see it grow in shape and see why you're building it and where it's going to happen and not get surprised towards the end. And same thing with drivers, like driver communication obviously was a big challenge at Uber, and there's a lot of things that we could have done way better. And I think adding transparency of what we're shipping to drivers and how things are going to change for drivers at any marketplace, like GoPuff, especially what we're trying to do now is to bring them along for how the company molds and shifts over the next few months. That's something I'll always keep doing just because they're so vital to the business. We don't want them to be like surprised or discouraged by a lack of transparency. I think additionally, something else that I really liked that we did at Uber that I've continued on at every company is being the team, whether it's product operations or not, if you're the team that's creating a lot of visibility into what you're building, like with centralized roadmaps or launch calendars, just creating org-wide visibility onto where the company is going, I think it creates a lot of really positive relationships and adds a lot of visibility to all of the user-facing teams who don't typically get included on all that type of communication. And it really goes a long way and helps you move faster. And also partnering with those user-facing teams early in the process to know what they'll need to do when new product ships, whether it's create new resources for all the people who are talking to the customers or having to staff up different staff levels for support people. Like it goes a long way relationship wise and also just helps them move faster and helps you ship product faster because you don't have to clean things up after the fact. And I think there's probably a lot to be said about transitioning from a mostly operational org to a mostly tech org. Uber went through that transition in 2014, 2015. Gopuff right now is going through that transition. We have thousands of employees, but only a few hundred or something you would consider like HQ employees. And so and we're not getting rid of any of the employees, but we're really shifting into being a tech company with all those operators. And so there's a lot of transition we have to make on how we operationalize getting feedback from the field and all the touch points the field has with product and what kind of resources we build. Like there's a huge exercise in all that right now.
Certainly, that's really helpful, and that's actually a perfect segue into Gopuff. Out of curiosity, what led you to joining the Gopuff team?
Yeah, I think after a few years at Stripe was a really awesome place to work, and I loved being able to work for my manager again twice, and there was a lot of awesome people there, but something about fintech was just not clicking in my head. Like I just couldn't get into it. I just was super unengaged. And that realization with myself happened at the same time that someone reached out to me from Gopuff, who I worked with at Uber. There's like a couple dozen people at Gopuff who are also from Uber. And he reached out and he asked me about like how to build a product operations team. And I started like, oh yeah, we did this and that. And then a lot of what I just said actually, but then the light bulb in my head went off and I was like, wait, I could do this for you guys. And I started looking at Gopuff, and I had actually just started using Gopuff for the first time here in Denver, probably a couple months before that. And I was like, oh, I really like this product. Like, tell me more about how it works. And that's when what Gopuff actually is clicked for me. And the potential of the role clicked for me. And so I got super excited about it and then went for it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I guess it might be helpful too. Would you mind giving us kind of like a high level overview of what Gopuff is as a marketplace?
Yeah, for sure. So we are in the space that we're starting, maybe other people are starting to call instant daily essentials. And the promise is that you'll get whatever you need, whether it be from like a typical pharmacy setup or convenience store setup or light grocery setup in hand in less than a half an hour. And the differentiator of this type of business versus like an Uber Eats or DoorDash, and we do have some competitors in the space who do the same thing as us, is we own all of the micro fulfillment. We have micro fulfillment centers, and we sprinkle them around the city in strategic places so that that cluster of people in that area can definitely get all of their items under a half an hour. And those micro fulfillment centers, we staff them with our own operators, and they're the ones packing the bags and sending them out. And the drivers are standing by at that location to bring it to the customer, then they go back to that location. And so because we own all the inventory in the micro fulfillment centers, we control, or not control, we manage all of the experience. And so there's more leverage for us to make it a positive experience for the courier as well as the customer and the people within the warehouse. And there's also a bigger opportunity to be profitable there too, because we're not a middleman, so to speak, for like a Walgreens or a CVS. We are us. And it allows us to do more experimentation too. So you may have heard in Philly and in some other cities, we will literally just park our own Gopuff kitchen outside, which is basically a food truck. And we can incorporate some fresh food options, like, or not fresh, like freshly made food, like a pizza or whatever else as part of your order. And we're also starting with a small pilot in, I believe, also Philly, where we actually have a pharmacy within our MFC, and we do select prescriptions too. So you can add a prescription to your order or just have that. So there's a lot of new verticals that we can explore while also being extremely quick and having better margin.
Awesome. Yeah, and so it's quite a different model, being vertically integrated compared to your days at Uber. So maybe transitioning, from Uber and your kind of the learnings and kind of best practices there over to Gopuff. What were some of the maybe like initial kind of learnings when you joined the Gopuff team and differences, I would say, in product ops?
Yeah, definitely the breadth of the problems we're solving is much different. I do have the luxury of saying I don't work on a lot of stuff like inventory and distribution. And that's like a huge space that where like our secret sauce, I guess, sort of lays. Like there are people who are constantly optimizing what inventory we get, where, how much. So at the MFCs, the micro fulfillment centers always have enough of what they need and when. So there's a ton of people who just like data scientists who research all these SKUs and how often they move. And make sure our MFCs are stocked appropriately. We also have people who are looking at like within the MFC, like how we design that. But I focus primarily on kind of split it like inbound versus outbound. And so all the inbound like distribution, inventory and stuff is handled by one of my colleagues. And then I focus everything outbound. So after the customer places an order, how are we routing those orders? How are we batching them together? How are we pairing them with the right driver? And then the driver experience from there on out, like the driver app and everything.
Yes. So are you primarily focused on you mentioned the driver experience with was it Ride OS that you?
Yeah. So I'm primarily focused on routing and dispatch with Ride OS, and within GoPuff, our driver experience teams too. So everything, we call it the Go Drive app. So everything from scheduling to the driver experience on trip to coming back to the MFC, that's all within my scope. And soon driver payments, we're going to be building more payments tools for them. Right now, one of the biggest pain points for drivers is that they're spread across so many apps because we were leveraging a lot of vendors, but now we're starting to bring it all into our Go Drive app. And that's a big part of what I work on.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm not sure how much you can share, but can you share with us like maybe like a recent kind of project that you've worked on specifically for some kind of context or?
Yeah, so this one's pretty visible too. I think today was the last stage of where we were bringing all of the driver scheduling tools into the Go Drive app. drivers previously had to use a third-party app to, I guess that's also good context to know with GoDrive, drivers sign up for, or I'm sorry, with Gopuff, drivers sign up for shifts in predetermined lengths of time. So it's not like Uber driver where you log on and you just take trips whenever at any length of time. You'll go what previously was a third-party app to see what shifts were available at the local MFC, pick those, and then you go show up and then you just take orders back and forth from that MFC. My most recent project with this was bringing all the scheduling tooling into the GoDrive app so we could get them all in one place and you could see as you're driving where to go back. And that finished up today. The next big thing now is what RideOS technology can we incorporate into GoPuff so we could reduce our cost per each order and be more efficient.
Awesome. That's really interesting. So I guess I did have a note here, and I kind of mentioned this to you before we started recording, but it's been said that you guys have over 7,000 employees. So does that include the drivers? Are they contractors or W-2 or?
It depends where. So most of the 7,000 employees are our internal employees, and that can include the general managers of each MFC, all of we call them OAs. They are the people who are in the MFCs, who are doing the packing, running out the orders to the drivers, just managing the MFC. We also have leadership up from there within the ops world. And that's a big bulk of the 7,000. And there's a few hundred of us at the HQ sort of level. For the driver population, it's an interesting split because we do have both 1099 and W-2 drivers. And that's all pretty much dependent on local regulations. So here in Colorado, drivers are W-2 because there's a state law around delivering alcohol and contractors. And so all the drivers here are W-2s. And that actually brought up an interesting conversation with a driver because I live here in Colorado. And one day, the most recent few I've had, I've been like just giving out my card and asking for feedback. And one of them was like, when are you going to let us be 1099s? And I'm like, well, we can't hear, sorry. So I was interested to see that people actually prefer the 1099 model, or at least in some cases. So I guess that driver in particular actually plans to move to California so he can be 1099. We acquired BevMo, and so we have all BevMo locations or MFCs now. And so he's going to try to transfer into one of those. But here I believe it's one other location where we have W-2s, but definitely Colorado is one where they have to be.
Got it. Yeah, and that's a great segue. And I mentioned earlier too, as far as BevMo and some recent acquisitions. So could you maybe share more on that kind of strategy, maybe just like in general for us?
Yeah, for sure. So what we try to do when we're making these acquisitions, like with BevMo, with Liquor Barn, we really want to grow our network of MFCs and the ability for us to offer these wide set of products to all these customers. And so we've historically acquired even individual convenience stores to get liquor licenses or tobacco licenses. And a partnership like BevMo gives us liquor distribution across California in one go. And we can also leverage their stores as what we call omni stores. So people can shop in store as well as we can distribute from there. It's a huge competitive benefit for us because we can quickly start to sell alcohol or other not just convenience store items, but also have the MFC footprint. And I think competitively, where you're located for instant delivery essentials is just as important as what you're selling. And that's what we're constantly looking at, especially as we're looking at new markets. Like in London, or the UK, we acquired 2 companies that will give us European distribution as well as those licenses. It's going to be really easy for us to get into those markets and then learn what we need to learn to then grow organically.
So is that part of your kind of like new market launch, I guess, playbook, as you could call it?
I don't know if acquiring the local company is specifically part of the new market launch playbook, but acquiring companies in the UK is allowing us to learn a lot about how to grow internationally. And we probably don't need to acquire one in every region to go there, but it's definitely gotten us a nice head start.
Certainly. Yeah. So I'm curious to learn more about like what are some like high level kind of metrics that you're focused on optimizing as a marketplace?
So right now, the hero metric is cost per order. With all of those employees that I mentioned, there's a cost per order to get it packed and ready for delivery. And then there's the cost per order to get it delivered to the customer. And right now, without RideOS, we had a very simple dispatch and routing algorithm in place. It made a lot of good decisions, but we also put a lot of power in the MFCs to change those decisions. But with the technology that RideOS has built, which was originally designed for autonomous vehicles and autonomous ride-sharing vehicles even, we can put much more intelligent routing logic in place so that we can more intelligently batch together and more intelligently route trips together so that we could get more efficiency from our driver population. And it goes a long way because a lot of MFCs will actually try to cap the number of orders a driver gets per trip to just one so we could get them there and back quicker. But even drivers are trying to see the value, like, let me go out and let me make a few deliveries, keep them close together, then I'll come back. It helps them because in some payment or some driver pay models, I think, give them an incentive per delivery, plus the tips per delivery are pretty good. So they can go out and get tips from 3-4 customers versus just one. It definitely makes it better for them. And so we want to make that happen with better batching. And I think they might also have some incentives that I think are designed like deliveries per shift. I'm not too involved with incentives, but it helps them as well. So we want to make sure that that's like more valuable for them. So we retain more drivers and also are getting more drivers to come to GoPuff and then bring that cost down per trip.
That's really interesting. And then, on another note too, I guess that might be helpful for some context. I believe it's been shared that you offer over 4,000 SKUs right now for products, or?
Yes, something like that. It varies by site too. Like some regions might only have a couple thousand, but some will have up, especially like our oldest regions will have 4,000.
Got it. Yeah. So as far as like the org structure, do you have kind of like a supply or kind of like a SKU team that focuses on that and kind of the offering?
For sure. Yeah. We have merchandise teams that do a ton of research in what will move quickly through our MFCs, what will acquire new customers. We obviously don't want a lot of dead, I guess, inventory and MFC taking up valuable space, especially because space on our MFCs and I guess in the market in general is pretty limited. So we want to make sure we're using the space as efficiently as possible and as profitably as possible. So there's a very, I think it's actually comparatively one of the bigger teams just because there's so much that goes into the right inventory and the right science behind it, and then the distribution of that inventory. But I don't have too much knowledge about how they do it all. I just know a lot happens there.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, a lot happens there for sure. So I feel like we could go on talking for quite some time, you and I, here about GoPuff. I do want to jump into some questions here and let others kind of come on here in a little bit.
Sure.
But before we do, so you have some really incredible experience, with product ops at some companies that are at a massive scale. But for those of us that are maybe in the earlier stages and kind of thinking through, potentially like how we can improve our kind of ops internally at our marketplaces, do you have any kind of like tips or, learnings that you like to share with us?
Yeah, I think all of the problems that product ops solves can be solved from day one, and then you just hand it off to product ops to own when you don't have the bandwidth for it. And that's making really transparent and visible, centralized like product feedback areas where like all the feedback from your users or from internal teams, put that all into one place so you can easily stack rank it together based on the size of the problem, the frequency of it being reported, who's saying it, and how it maps to specific projects you're already working on. Like there are whole companies who are like SaaS companies built on solving this problem, but you could probably do it on your own really easily, really early on. And it could be a Google Sheet where you map feedback to Jira boards, just whatever it is. Know what your customers are saying or what your internal teams are saying, and map that to your roadmap or like what you hope to have on your roadmap soon based on your resources. But it helps move things really quickly when you know who you're building for and why, and who you're prioritizing and why, if you've segmented certain customers. And it helps rally people around specific goals too, rather than just trying to hit one problem at a time. Another thing I would say is get your process down for how you ship product out to your customers, based on like the size of what you're shipping, whether it's going to get marketing from third parties or you're going to market it, or if it's something small internally, having standardized development playbooks around how you ship each one of those products helps you, especially when your resources are so small at a small company, enlisting the right resources for the right ships. And lastly, I would say just adding transparency into what you're working on, like separate from the actual feedback from all those users and user-facing teams. Just keep one place where everyone can see what the product teams are working on, what the timelines are, even if they're moving or not super specific. Because especially at a Gopuff sized company, I spend a lot of time, and I'm sure the PMs right now spend a lot of time in so many redundant conversations, just like sharing that information over and over again. And thankfully, I'm almost done shipping like a new unified roadmap here at Gopuff, but like enable those stakeholders to be like self-serve. Like there's so much that you can build once and just keep updated with little effort there on out. So you don't have to constantly exert yourself and not be able to scale yourself that way.
That's really great. I can certainly relate with the redundant conversations on that note. So. Awesome.
Yeah, I feel bad for these like PMs and engineers who like tell the same people what's coming over and over again. Everyone's super excited to hear it, but we could have made that available to them.
Certainly. Cool. So Faraj, did you want to jump on?
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Gideon, thanks so much for making the time for this chat. This was super insightful. I'm working on a company called Silco. It's a compliance API for companies. I work with independents, but really like one of the questions that I had is, with Gopuff's business model and the like different markets that you operate in, I'm sure you have to make a lot of decisions, kind of like the example you gave about Colorado, where you have to augment the classification of the worker depending on the state that you operate in. I was just really curious, like what kind of different silos within your organization collaborate on that, and who does like the onus fall on to pull a decision? Because I know there's like the GCs, there's like your ops leaders, there's your like legal team. So I'm just really curious.
Yeah, one different thing about GoPuff is that there are different operations orgs that are focused on specific things. There's a driver operations org and an MFC operations org. And some of the problems that you mentioned around like where we launch and why and what needs that will then create. The driver operations org works with the MFC operation. Well, first, let me back up to there's a team that actually determines where the MFC should go and what the potential attainable reach of customers are for those areas. And then they partner with yet another team, like our real estate team, to figure out what's possible within that area. And real estate comes back and says, okay, in this marketplace, we have these potential leases that we could sign. The marketplace team designs potential delivery zones. And then once the MFC lease is locked down and delivery zones are there, then the MFC operations team can get to work on all their staffing and whatnot. And then there's also the driver operations org who owns the acquisition of like the driver funnel, basically delivering the needs of that driver funnel to product and to MFC operations, like if they're a W-2 place or what regulations are involved there. And the existence of all these teams is another reason why product operations is so important, because there's so many different people who have a hand in making a market get spun up, that there needs to be a little bit more orchestration across all of it. And so that's what I'm starting to dive into now, and how we can make all of that super transparent and super easy just to plug into and see what the status of everything is and what else is needed to get a market live.
Awesome.
That's super cool.
Awesome. That's a great question. Hey, Davey, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot for sharing all of that. It's super interesting. So I got a specific question, like regarding your experience. So you've been working for massive companies, like Mike said, and I was curious about what kind of big challenges or failure you faced within those companies that can help us navigate our own startups.
Yeah, I would say every learning experience comes back to communication. And I would say most of that probably was either related to Uber or Stripe too. Like every time there was a bit of a failure or a bit of a backstep, it had to come down to something that was miscommunicated or not communicated properly. And that could all be fixed with just being transparent about what is prioritized and why and what's coming and when, and not leading things to the end where people higher up might be concerned or confused about what's happening. Related to like major product launches or product changes. I can think back to an example at Uber where and I was talking about the search algorithms before, where we had shipped a new version of the algorithm. We had already tested in a few cities, and we were super confident in how it would work and how safe it was. And so when we were planning to launch some of our largest cities leading up, I forget if it was like Halloween or New Year's, but basically one of the biggest nights of the year. And leadership was super concerned about that plan. And because they were learning about it as we were communicating it to broader ops, they were very concerned about it. They were wanting to change those plans. And so we had to kind of fire drill fixing, kind of just catching them up to speed, like what we've done so far, where we've tested, how much volume we've pushed, like how safe it was, and all of that scrambling last minute to get leadership buy-in. Could have been saved with just bringing them along for the ride and making sure that they were aware of what was happening. And all of that learning has been molded into like process that I take on now with creating these like really visible roadmaps, specific types of newsletters that I send out to across all stakeholders on a weekly basis. Just erring on the side of high transparency so that there isn't like room for someone to assume there, I guess, wasn't communication. And there have been other smaller examples of that, but always I think it comes back to improvements in communication and transparency.
There's really great question, Davey.
So, thanks a lot. And just to jump on this question, like when you mean communication, so you mean with the people, let's say in the HQ, or do you look as well about communication, let's say for Uber with the driver, because in that case that we talk about communication with thousands of other people. So how do you navigate with also this kind of communication where you have so many potential people you have to talk to that actually you have to make it through emails or through, like, you know what I'm saying, like one-way communication where you don't really get feedback directly? How do you navigate with this?
Yeah, I think all of the learning experiences that I was thinking of was more around internal, both executive and internal stakeholder communication. But what you mentioned now is also a good point, because you can't really speak to thousands and thousands of drivers. So you have to build mechanisms to aggregate their feedback and know what the top issues are. And there are a lot of ways that we've done this more programmatically, where we have created inbound channels that would automatically aggregate different pieces of feedback for us through Google Sheets or whatever, just pulling out themes, the types of drivers who were saying specific types of feedback, and prioritizing different product changes based on that. The communication back out to them is something that we definitely could have done much better once we decided we were going to fix something or prioritize something. I think maybe some of those larger orgs were always kind of cautious about how transparent they were with the driver population. But if it were me, and especially now with Gopuff, we're going to be erring on the side of building new communications tools so we could tell them what problems we're fixing and when they can expect it. We're currently locking down a new version of the GoDrive app that we'll have communication cards in. So like as we're shipping totally new pieces of product to them, as we consolidate into the GoDrive app, we want to tell them when they can expect those changes, because right now their front line is like talking to the MFCs when they have issues or questions. We want to take that off the MFC's plate.
Amazing. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Hey, Gideon, so I'm kind of curious to learn about, at the scale that Gopuff is at, and even maybe, back in the days of Uber, introducing some of these, some of the new kind of functionality, say, for instance, to drivers or kind of consolidation, within the app. Could you maybe share more about that actual kind of rollout process and communication process?
Yeah, so because we have thousands of operators in the company who oftentimes are the frontline people who speak with drivers, a lot of that process involves bringing them along for what we're building and how they can help support it when the rollout happens. We've split up our network into a few different regions with regional leaders, and we've also set up a new program called core teams. And so from every region, we'll identify operators who are really in tune with specific types of products. So I have a core team of people who are really great at understanding dispatch in each region, or understanding the GoDrive app in each region. And they're my quicker feedback loop on what the top issues are from drivers are, or kind of just like gut checking changes that we want to make. And they also help us determine what the best like stages of rollout should be for the region, which sites we should choose, which regions we should choose. And so, and this is something we actually did a little bit at both Uber and Stripe, I would say, even before GoPuff, identifying those strong operators in the field, being that like weekly or bi-weekly touch point with them, so you don't have to try to aggregate feedback from thousands of people each time you want to validate something. And bringing it to the field at a priority, you don't really know if it was the right decision, but they help us choose where to go first and not just the metrics. And so an example of like this driver scheduling tool, we worked with them to figure out which sites we should test first. And we're getting their feedback from those sites. We would bring it to more people, get their feedback, bring it to more people from there. So kind of like a staged rollout, using their feedback as an input onto where we should go and why. And even for newer, smaller features that don't really require like a high communication rollout, we also leverage them to figure out like, hey, does this new button look good, or does this new UI for whatever internal tool look good? And they'll give us feedback. We'll make some changes, and then we'll scale it out to the rest of the field pretty quickly. And the reception is pretty positive. They're also really good about just getting feedback from their co-operators for us and putting it all into a more concise summary rather than trying to get it all raw from the whole field every single time. And something that we're working on now, our new tool, because right now our internal dispatchers have dispatch kind of specific tools until RideOS helps us automate more of it. And it puts a lot of decision making on the operators for now. And so all of these new features coming out that will help make more recommendations rather than just give all the raw decisions to the operator. We want to make sure it's making the right decisions or making the right recommendations. And so they'll help us validate those before we give it to the rest of the field too.
Awesome. That's really interesting. Yeah, I've been a part of some of the new kind of product rollouts on the user end for Stripe, and I know they do a great job with that. So, so you did mention kind of identifying, those ideal users, to initially roll it out to. So could you maybe share to, I guess, kind of like go a little bit deeper on that? Could you share an example of how you identify those users, and then, specifically kind of communicate that rollout with an example maybe?
Yeah. So thinking back at Stripe, when we wanted user adoption of a very specific set of users, like we recently, well, I don't know what's happened since Square acquired Afterpay, but while I was Stripe, we worked on the Afterpay, like adding Afterpay as a possible payment method for Stripe users. And so what we did is we often like to reach out to users who we think the product would be a good fit for and offer them the ability to be in the beta. And for some of the even earlier beta users, we'll even create a Slack channel and just work with them really closely on that feedback. What we do is we look at certain things like at Stripe, we have access to a lot of data about the purchases, obviously, because we're running them. So we can see like what is the like merchant category code, what is the country of the buyer or the state of the buyer. And if all those things align with like a buy now, pay later payment method, like Afterpay, if it's like a retail type thing and not SaaS, or if they're in an Afterpay country, then and we can also see the volume too. Like if they're the right type of user, we should reach out to them and say, hey, do you want to try offering Afterpay and potentially increasing the size of the purchases and the frequency purchases. And so we'll reach out to those users, we'll read them into the beta, we'll validate if offering Afterpay, which is more expensive, does bring a net positive benefit to them. If it does, we can also communicate that benefit to even a greater set of beta users, and make sure that continues on as we get closer to the rollout. And in those early stages, we get a lot of feedback on the documentation, on the support, on the developer experience, all those things that are really critical to get early on, so that as we scale out and make it available to everyone, there aren't a bunch of like smaller negative experiences that become the narrative of this product. Similarly, like when we were offering not buy now, pay later, but other non-card payment methods available, like there are a bunch of European ones like Ideal, SoFort, a few others. We made those available to pretty much anyone who wanted to accept them, regardless of which country they were in. And so, for example, if you were based in Hong Kong, but you had a lot of Dutch customers, we wanted to offer you to be in the beta to, with almost no additional development work, offer Ideal, which is Dutch, to Ideal customers and see if that increased your business. And we saw a really big increase because offering locally relevant payment methods, surprise, surprise, increases business. And we were able to use that as a case study and sell it to more users, and then bring that product to market so there'd be more adoption. I think we really love at Stripe, we really love bringing in those early beta users, bringing them into Slack channels and just getting their feedback pretty regularly, even if it's something super small. After we get the development experience out of the way, we'll keep them around for a few weeks or a few months. As more changes are shipped, we'll get their feedback like in real time. It's always been super helpful. It's very different from obviously a marketplace where there's thousands and thousands of drivers or couriers or whoever else. We can't really get their real-time feedback on little incremental changes. And so that's what we lean on those operators for.
That's a really great example and super helpful. Yeah, so I was kind of asking that, and you kind of started to go down that path, I guess, with it, which is you mentioned leaning on the operators. So for some of us that are operating marketplaces and looking to have a better kind of feedback loop from some of our supply, maybe ways that we could think about doing that.
The first program I mentioned, I think, is always super successful, like having that core group of more experienced or more plugged in operators to get quicker feedback loops from them. We're also starting, just for like the greater operator org, we're trying to create some new feedback mechanisms so we could just aggregate all the feedback as it comes in from them. For directly from the drivers, we integrate with DoorDash so that they send in they send in feedback about the driver app really easily with DoorDash, and that feeds into the database that will start aggregating based on specific keywords or themes. We want to use that same kind of methodology for our operators to, like, as they're working within our internal tooling or as they start to experience an issue of like drivers physically coming in and reporting something, we want to build something that aggregates that feedback that isn't just like a Google sheet, I guess. So that's like still something I'm wanting to solve. At Stripe, we had a really good process for that where you could log feedback directly into the tool and it would create a Jira ticket, and we would like move Jira tickets into specific epics. And if a lot of people were saying something, we would see the epic of all these subtasks. And I love that a lot. And I think we'll be able to do that at Gopuff as well. But creating really easy mechanisms to bring in feedback and aggregate it and connect it to our work boards is basically the goal.
Got it. Yeah, that'd be a massive Google sheet with the scale you're at with Gopuff. So
exactly.
Yeah, cool. I think, hey, David, do you want to jump back on? You sent me a message.
Yeah, sure. I would like to ask another question. I'm going to assume on this one, maybe I'm wrong. I assume that Gopuff has a rating system for all the delivery man, right?
Actually, not yet. So that's something we want to add in. Right now, we just have like a happy or unhappy rating for the order itself, but we don't have rating for couriers yet.
Okay, so this question will be more regarding Uber. Have you noticed any negative patterns by rating the drivers? Like, is the fact to rate drivers led to some negative pattern that you have noticed within the company that we can't really see as a consumer? Because I have a marketplace that's going to operate with this kind of element with rating the different vendors and stuff. Is there anything that we should be aware of in order to prevent that?
Yeah, I would say the rating system evolved at Uber quite a bit, because in the very early days, ratings were more specifically used to determine which drivers would stay on the platform. And it was pretty strict early on. But in hindsight, that wasn't like the right thing to do. Like, we should have just kept anyone on who wanted to partner with the platform and help them become a higher rated driver. And I think that's what they do now. But one thing that we want to launch ratings for at Gopuff is to create almost like a rewards program, similar to even Uber. Like Uber has Uber Gold, Uber Platinum, whatever, for their drivers. And we want to figure out the limits of who would be in which tier. And I think Uber uses ratings for that. And so I think using ratings as more of a reward versus a punishment, I think, is the right move. And I think everyone started to realize that with all these rewards programs or like tiers and whatnot. I think early on at Uber too, I think maybe there could have been some negatives around cancellation behavior and ratings. Like, especially, I know on the driver's side, if they see a low rated rider, they might cancel it. It's also possible that the flip side happens too, like if a rider sees like a 4.1 or a 4.0 instead of like a regular 4.6 or above, they might be like, oh, I might cancel. Probably not as much these days because supply is pretty limited, but I think in the past that probably would have happened. I wouldn't necessarily say I would hide ratings for everyone for that reason, but I would definitely monitor for those things, like if cancellation behavior or if any other metrics are impacted by or they're correlated to specific ratings, like there should be some kind of action plan for that.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's super interesting. So just to focus on, so one of the things that you said is like rewarding instead of punishing. What do you do with, let's say, a driver that would be bad drivers, so they would got like bad rates, but they still show up on time, all of that. How would you help them to get a better rate when you all work through this platform? What are your thoughts about this? How would you do it if you were in charge of that?
I think there are a lot of opportunities that could be surfaced based on ratings that might actually not have anything to do with the driver. Something that happened recently at Gopuff is there was a specific SKU that was broken for almost everyone that received it, and that caused unhappiness ratings, like because we only have like happy, unhappy with the order. And so we discovered that because the SKU correlated across all those unhappy orders. Same thing with Uber. You might have drivers who are driving in a very specific area who are getting really poor ratings, and that could be something related to maybe access to apartment complexes or specific traffic patterns in the area or navigational issues that like don't record a specific lane change or something. There could be something totally unrelated to the driver, and finding what else correlates besides the driver to that rating might uncover those things. Even though the ratings attached to the driver, unfortunately, there might be things outside of the driver's control that bring that rating down. So we always want to see what else could be there that's impacting it. And to answer your question, like I would first see if those things exist. If it is truly the driver, then I would found that drivers can be pretty receptive to feedback too. And so if there is feedback that you can pull about that driver, whether it's in like comments left by customers or behavior you can find in the data, I think giving them that feedback in a really helpful way would help them just do better going forward and then bring that rating back up.
Thanks a lot.
Awesome.
Super useful.
Yeah, that's actually that's really interesting point. Yeah, that might be a great driver, but my ice cream might be melted. So
that's another thing too. Like we had an issue with like in the middle of summer, like ice cream not being super frozen anymore. So thankfully, because like our ratings at GoPuff right now are specifically tied to the order, we could easily see unhappiness and frozen food was correlating. So we quickly got on that and fixed it.
Awesome. Cool. So I think we have time for one more question. Miriam, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, sure. I have a couple questions actually. So I'm just curious how you think, since you worked at Uber, how they managed to leave kind of an opening for GoPuff to get so big, because it seemed like it would be a good idea for Uber to like kind of built that themselves, and now they're like partnering with GoPuff. So it's just interesting how they kind of missed that opportunity. And then I'm also just curious, like given how difficult it is to like hire labor right now, like how are you guys able to grow and compete for those kind of workers in the fulfillment and driving, and how do you guys actually like scale that right now?
Yeah, for sure. Your first question, I think I have more opinions than facts about, like mostly related to the appetite of current leadership to go into these new endeavors, especially as it's like a public company now trying to increase the share price, which selfishly I hope it does. I think, especially because they've been selling off business units. They did acquire Corner Shop, which is an interesting play into this market, but they've been selling off a lot of other stuff. And I think them building a net new business unit around all of like MFCs and a new type of like real estate array, like all that stuff was probably too scary for them right now, which is why they've chosen to partner with us, or why they probably acquired Corner Shop, which is already pretty heavily Uber. In general, though, I think all of these major apps are starting to backtrack a little bit, because you see like the news that came out about like Instacart and DoorDash who were trying to get in cahoots together, and DoorDash lets you add 7-Eleven orders to your other order, like while it's en route. Like there's definitely a lot as these fundraising rounds and all these competitors spin up. I think now they're starting to have that aha moment. I can't specifically say like what made them not do it until now, other than seeing us, but I do think it was something they probably could have done if they did it a few years ago. Surprisingly, Gopuff is actually like 7, 8, 9 years old, but it's finally started to take off like the last 2, 3 years. And I don't think they just saw that kind of scale coming. For your second question, could you remind me what it was one more time? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just curious, since you guys are hiring a lot of the kind of lower wage workers like fulfillment and drivers, and it's such a cost sensitive business, and to kind of be hiring those people right now, I'm just curious like how you guys compete and like how you're able to grow those teams so quickly, given how crazy it is to find and keep those people.
I would say on the driver side, we do offer a better experience because with other major apps, they're going to any number of places, but for us, they're going to very specific MFCs. So they can always come back to the same place. We put a lot into the experience too. So we like actually offer parking, we offer bathrooms, we offer a place to wait that's potentially heated or air conditioned, or not potentially, it is. So that it's not like they're on their own for however many hours going to however many restaurants or drop off pickup points, whatever. So it's easier by comparison. And I think because there are usual faces behind the MFCs, it helps them feel more connected to the company. And that's an experience they don't get with the marketplace, where the only experience they have is within their car. So we're really leaning into that differentiating factor by doing even more on that side with like improving the experience for our courier partners when they're not on trip and making our MFCs even better. There's also a whole section of people are doing with incentives and subsidies and whatnot, but I think pay aside, which I think maybe whether or not they make more or less money, the money is also way more consistent on GoPuff versus a marketplace where everything is up almost to chance. They have specific set hours with us and a better idea of how much money they're going to make. I always remember at Uber negative feedback around the inconsistency of how much money they were going to make. It was always a question mark. And it was a problem that at the time, maybe they did, but at the time I was there, it was really hard to solve. Like, how do we make earnings more consistent? GoPuff's model does that, which is really cool. One open challenge I would say is, or so I've heard, might be like the staffing of our MFCs. I don't think they've like fully, there's not like a really big problem there, but I think they could do better on like retaining all the people who are actually doing the order packing and running out to vehicles. I think that's a big focus right now too, though.
Awesome. That's a really great question. Cool. Well, this is a really great chat. I feel like we could go on for quite some time here on all the specific questions, from operators here in the community that are on the chat today. But yeah, this is great. So I appreciate taking the time to join us here and share more about all your incredible experience and some insights. Before we wrap things up, where can we keep up with you? Time for a quick plug.
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to get more onto Twitter, so I'll probably share a new Twitter account or something on the Everything Marketplaces portal. But definitely feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Gideon Hod. I think it's just /n/Gideon Hod. I'm definitely open to chat or to schedule chats. I have the Calendly link I can send you out to if you want to like talk more. But also on the Everything Marketplaces tool, feel free to reach out to me there too.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. Thanks. This is a really fun chat. So I really appreciate taking the time. And thanks everyone for joining in and the great questions today.